This is the cornerstone to understanding the measurement of every possible scenario while utilizing a mathematical property. Units give us an on-paper understanding of how to perceive our surroundings. We know everyday usage of units such as height, miles, and speed, but one would be hard-pressed to understand the units of units of units. For example, mass is measured in kilograms, but then how do you measure the force needed to move that mass? Well, since mass is measured in kilograms and acceleration is measured in meters per second square, you multiply both and you get kilogram meters per second square, and that's called a Newton. Now, the energy required to move a Newton by force 1 meter in any direction is called a joule, and 4.2 joules is 1 small calorie. As I stated, everything has an on-paper measurement in units. A calorie is the energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water from 0 to 1 degree Celsius. But calories, although utilized by a vast majority of people as simply calorie, are actually in and of itself broken up into 2 units. A calorie, which is defined as small, and a kilocalorie, which is defined as large. The calorie count that is placed on food labels are actually kilocalories, the large calorie, which is why you see the abbreviation kcal. The word calorie comes from calor, which is Latin for heat. Calories are actually a unit of heat that can provide energy to power your body. The calorie as a unit to measure heat was introduced to the public in 1852 by a chemist named Pierre-Antoine Favre and a physicist named Johann T. Silbermann. However, the true origin of the use of calories comes from Nicolas Clement, a French physicist who used calories to explain heat engines. It wasn't until 1894 that the discussion of calories within human energy needs began. From here, scientists and physicists have had major interest in the relationship between calorie consumption and biological responses. In 1935, Clive McKay and colleagues published a seminal paper that showed restricting food increases longevity in rats. This was further explained in 1960 by Berg and Sims as a simplification of what was healing the rats, as Berg and Sims proposed that the life extension was due to fat reduction, not specifically caloric reduction, and that reducing calories was simply a prerequisite to the reduction in body fat. Calories in versus calories out. This concept seems simple enough, and the truth is that calories in is simple to answer. You simply have to ask, how much did you consume? Where the concept of calories become complex and up for debate is in the process of calories out. There are so many variables to calories out that we are still arguing and researching this concept to this day. This is because there are many more varied components to calories out: resting energy expenditure, inter-individual metabolic rate, physical activity. Pinpointing calories out is a much more daunting task. This is why many argue that the 3,500 calorie threshold for 1 pound of body fat, meaning it would take a reduction of 3,500 calories for 1 pound of body fat to be burned from your body. Many state that due to the variability of calories out, that it is ludicrous to think that 3,500 calories would reduce body fat by any specific number. However, it has been proven that 1 pound of fat is equivalent to an approximation of 3,500 calories. But that's not to say that those calories remove 1 for 1 with body fat when in a caloric deficit. That is the variable. Where is the removal of calories coming from? This has been debated for decades, and certain interests and theories peaked in 1970 with the Atkins diet. Since then, the battle to understand the metabolic advantage commenced. Is it true that if one reduced calories from one macronutrient versus the other, that one would obtain a metabolic advantage? The advent of the Atkins diet argued that high carbohydrate induces an internal starvation-like response within the body that increases insulin secretion, inhibiting lipolysis and the release of fatty acids. Now, the laws of thermodynamics have been thoroughly tested, stating that a calorie must be a calorie, and an isocaloric diet such as high fat versus low carbs or high carbs versus low fat having different metabolic effects breaks this law and would inherently state that not all calories raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degrees Celsius. This was problematic, but was attempted to be explained by Richard Feynman and Eugene Fine. They argue that stating a calorie is a calorie and nothing more actually violates the laws of thermodynamics. Are you confused by this? Well, let me further explain their position. You see, the laws of thermodynamics may seem like a surface level phrase, but the key word in the statement is the word law, as it contains an S at the end, which means there are multiple laws within thermodynamics, 4 to be exact, and it ranges from 0 to 3. The 0th law, which helped define temperature, stating that if 2 systems are each in thermal equilibrium with a third system, they are in equilibrium with each other. This basically means all heat is of the same kind. The first law states that energy cannot be created or destroyed in an isolated system, meaning within the rigid, unmovable walls of energy, nothing can be made or destroyed. Although energy can be moved around and transformed, they cannot be removed or replaced. The third law states that the entropy of a system approaches a constant value as the temperature approaches absolute zero. Essentially, this law is implying that it is impossible for any procedure to bring a system to the absolute zero in a finite number of steps. What the researchers looked at, however, to proclaim metabolic advantage is the second law of thermodynamics. The second law states that the total entropy of an isolated system can never decrease over time and is always increasing. That is the law used to contend against the notion that a calorie is a calorie. Because the second law is a dissipation law, something is lost and therefore balance is not to be expected in diet interventions within the macronutrient effect of weight loss. So essentially, this law allows for calories to be different when taken into account its macronutrient properties. This continued to fuel the fire of calories in versus calories out against those who felt macronutrients held metabolic differences in weight loss. Many studies were conducted and argued in favor of both the naysayers and the proponents of this system. But people like Marion Nestle, the author of Why Calories Count: From Science to Politics, were explaining the metabolic ward studies conducted in 1964, in which obese patients consumed low-calorie diets with different macronutrient compositions showed no significant difference in weight loss or fat loss. A journalist by the name of Gary Taubes, who wrote a book against the consumption of carbohydrates, started the Nutrition Science Initiative to fund and sponsor research studies surrounding the efficiency of carbohydrate-restricted diets. This set the stage for a metabolic ward study that would commence in 2016. This was set to prove once and for all the low carbohydrate, high fat diet did indeed provide a metabolic advantage. Now, let me break down the tiers in study design. You ever notice that one study can say one thing while another study can say the complete opposite, leaving you to wonder what is true and what is not true? Well, the devil is in the design details. A controlled trial is tier 4. A randomized controlled trial is tier 3. One step above that is a crossover randomized controlled trial sitting at tier 2, in which not only do you control intake and macronutrition, but you also use a period to wash out and switch groups to determine that the outcome is accurate because it can be replicated amongst the same groups. What stands on top as the gold standard as tier 1 is a metabolic ward study. Now, these are a bit more rare and carry limitations, usually in length of time and participation, because of how rigorous the study design can be. You see, in a metabolic ward study, the participants are compensated very well to agree to be enclosed with 100% supervision to ensure that they are adhering to the strict diet structure. That means for the entirety of the study, they are not allowed to go home to their families. Although this seems overly aggressive, it provides the best method of ensuring 100% accuracy with adherence. In 2016, the NUSI sponsored a study that did just that. 17 overweight men were enclosed and fed a high carbohydrate baseline diet for 4 weeks and a keto diet for another 4 weeks. Each subject was evaluated for 2 consecutive days per week in a metabolic chamber to assess energy expenditure. Dual energy X-ray absorptiometry was used for body composition as well as doubly labeled water. The keto diet showed increases in energy expenditure, but unfortunately no increase in fat loss. Also, it was argued that the increases in energy expenditure was nearly undetectable, about 50 calories, which was picked up by the metabolic chamber. Instantly, there was outrage, many stating that the small sample size as well as the small time period of just 1 month is not enough to make the study's conclusion the final discourse. But it begs the question, are calories the true source of weight loss, and do other diets do anything different metabolically to change that? In 2017, there was a follow-up metabolic ward study that lasted 2 months and netted similar results. What about the absence of food? Yes, intermittent fasting. Unlike the keto diet, simply not eating triggers a multitude of hormonal responses that can prime the body to protect muscle and utilize fat oxidation primarily for energy expenditure. There have been many randomized controlled crossover trials that show an advantage when all macronutrients are equal towards intermittent fasting, when calorie intake is reduced to 0. Those who are not familiar with the importance of 0-calorie intake intervals may proclaim that meta-analysis has debunked fasting in terms of elevated fat burning, but fail to realize that those analyses do not restrict food consumption, which is the catalyst for intermittent fasting's beneficial effect. Till this day, an intermittent fasting metabolic ward study with 0 caloric intake until feeding time has yet to be conducted, or any intermittent fasting protocol to be exact. A study of that rigor would indeed give us more insight into the metabolic properties of such a protocol. Mixing in a keto-like diet in conjunction to fasting may also provide benefits as it controls the hormone insulin, allowing that hormone to be reduced much faster. So what can be said about calories in versus calories out? The truth is a bit fuzzy. You see, the obesity epidemic continues to grow year over year, even though this simple model has existed since the 1800s. Yes, it is true that calories are an important factor, but it must be taken with the understanding of how varied and dynamic the calories out portion is to the entire equation, and looking at calories through a broader lens, focusing on hormonal responses as intently as we do the calories in versus out model may open up more pathways towards success for those who struggle with fat loss. What is going on, guys? Thank you so much. I wanted to dive deep into the calories in, calories out model. I wanted people to understand what a calorie is and why the debate is so varied. This is my 4th video essay, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it. One thing that I would want to say coming off of this essay is that I would definitely love to see a metabolic ward study involving 0 caloric intake with intermittent fasting, equating the calories of both groups, just having one group fast for a specific amount of time, it can be 16 hours, and consuming their calories in an 8-hour window versus another group consuming their meals within a breakfast, lunch, dinner model. It is actually possible that because of intermittent fasting's gaps within eating, that there can be a compounding effect over time. And this compounding effect, although calories are equal per day, may lead to an increase in calorie intake overall. And that's just my 2 cents on that matter. But of course, I want to hear your thoughts. Let's have a discussion down below in the comments section. And I'm going to thank my patrons from my Patreon, and I'm going to put their names right up here. And as always, guys, I'll see you on Sunday for another FAQ. Peace.